Vladimir Putin has many problems. His war in Ukraine has stretched on for far longer than he thought it would. Almost all of the West has turned against him, and let's face it, he's getting so long in the tooth that he'll be long gone before Ukraine ever topples. But he never expected France to become as much of a problem as it's just become. Without even firing a shot, France has hit Russia where it hurts, becoming Putin's biggest problem overnight. Or should we say problems? There are two ways that France has delivered a swift kick to the Russian gut in recent days. The second is especially important because it's helping Ukraine to do something that it desperately needs to do, as you'll learn if you keep watching. As for the first shot, France has just taken control over one of the many shadow tankers that are helping Russia to illegally ship its oil all over the world. On January 22nd, BBC News reported that France had seized a suspected Russian Shadow Fleet tanker sailing through the Mediterranean. The Grinch, which we promise isn't Jim Carrey in an elaborate disguise, was seized because it was subject to international sanctions and suspected of flying a false flag, according to France's President Emmanuel Macron. The tanker's crew must have felt like somebody was stealing Christmas when the French Navy arrived. After storming the vessel, the Navy conducted an in-depth search that led to the country's maritime authorities to conclude that the Navy had confirmed the doubts as to the regularity of the flag. That's code for Russia's ship was flying under another nation's flag, a regular trick employed by the Shadow Fleet to evade suspicion. Soon after the seizure, Macron took to X to send a message that seemed directed straight at Putin. "We will not tolerate any violation," Macron declared, before he went on to outline what the French Navy did. The operation was conducted on the high seas in the Mediterranean with the support of several of our allies. It was carried out in strict compliance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. A judicial investigation has been opened. The vessel has been diverted, Macron added. That mention of allies is a clue to the fact that France didn't act alone on the morning of January 22nd. It had help from a key ally, the United Kingdom. According to the UK outlet LBC, a Royal Navy patrol ship was on the tail of the Shadow Fleet tanker long before the French Navy struck. The outlet reports that the UK Defence Secretary John Healey has revealed that the UK provided tracking support to the French authorities as the Grinch sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar. That makes complete sense. The Strait of Gibraltar is a narrow waterway between Spain's southern tip and the north of Africa. It provides a safe transit route for ships traveling between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, and the UK just so happens to maintain a base on the small and rocky island that shares its name with the strait. LBC says that the UK deployed the HMS Dagger, likely from that base, to track Russia's sneaking ship as it moved into the Mediterranean. Flying under the Comoros flag, which is an East African nation that is so obscure that it would be difficult for many to pick out on a map, the Grinch continued into the Mediterranean, where it was seized by the French authorities. The Grinch was a clear target because it was sanctioned by the UK, European Union or EU, and the US, all of which accused it of being part of the Shadow Fleet that has been keeping oil money flowing into Russia despite the sanctions that those three entities have levied. LBC adds that later investigations have revealed that the ship was traveling from Russia's Murmansk region, though it's unclear where it was going as it was intercepted in waters between Spain and Morocco. This is the second time the UK has gotten involved in a Shadow Fleet tanker seizure in the last few weeks. Earlier in January, the US set its sights on a pair of ships, one sailing in the Caribbean and the other in the North Atlantic Ocean, that is suspected of carrying oil between Russia and Venezuela. One of those ships, now named the Marinera, but previously called the Bella One, had led US forces on a chase across hundreds of miles of water following an initial attempt to seize the ship. The US finally caught up to the ship between Scotland and Iceland, where it was discovered sailing under the flag of Guyana. In this case, the UK provided enabling support, Sky News reports. It gave the US the use of several of its bases, in addition to making the RFA Tide Force, which is typically used as a refueling vessel, available for the American pursuers. More support came in the form of at least one aircraft from the Royal Air Force, which provided aerial surveillance to ensure the US remained on the right track. It seems like the UK has been busy with the Shadow Fleet. But in both of these cases, the UK took the supporting role. It's France that has taken all of the headlines on January 22nd by delivering a shock to the Shadow Fleet that will have Putin reeling. Losing yet another of his shady ships is the last thing that Russia's president wanted, as he's relying on these creaking tankers to keep cash flowing into Russia at a time when it needs as much money as it can get. Russia created its Shadow Fleet as a means to circumvent the many sanctions that the collective West has implemented against Russia since Putin launched his Ukraine invasion. The Guardian offers a useful rundown of what the fleet is. It's filled with hundreds of unregulated and old tankers that Russia has purchased from all around the world, often sailing in states of disrepair that would make them illegal to operate were they subject to actual inspections. These ships have been carrying Russian oil to countries like India, China, Venezuela, and any other nation willing to buy Russia's sanctioned oil at the massive discounts Putin has been offering. This fleet is huge. The Guardian claims that Russia's shadow fleet includes 1,423 tankers, of which 921 are subject to sanctions by at least one of the three entities we mentioned earlier. Those numbers are from Lloyd's List Intelligence, the outlet says, and they're not concrete. The shadow fleet may be even larger than these numbers suggest. That's the thing about a secret collection of ships. It's always going to be difficult to know exactly how many vessels are in the fleet. In that context, France seizing one shadow fleet tanker isn't a massive blow to Russia. Yet the seized tanker will no longer be able to sail, but others can replace it. There's a reason why Putin has spent $14 billion as of May 2025 per Ukrainian shipping magazine assembling this fleet after all. However, far more important than the seizing of the Grinch is the message that the taking of the vessel off the waves sends to Russia. France is watching. And it's not alone, as the UK and the US have both taken active steps in recent weeks to curtail shadow fleet activity wherever they can. A fleet that once operated with impunity is now under more scrutiny than ever before. Scrutiny creates risk. Putin will be sending shadow fleet ships out to make deliveries and pick up cargo. He has to. Oil is one of Russia's most important moneymakers, even when it's being forced to sell that oil at a discount. With its high budget deficit, lack of access to international credit, and blocked foreign exchange reserves, Russia needs access to as many revenue streams as it can get, and oil is among the largest of those streams. But now, Putin knows that sanctioning nations are watching. Every shadow fleet ship that leaves Russia's shores could now be captured at any time, especially if they sail into European or American waters. Our point is simple. France has seized one ship today. Tomorrow, France, perhaps along with its allies, might start a more concerted campaign to take down as much of the shadow fleet as possible. If that happens, Putin won't be able to do anything about it because the very nature of this fleet means that Russia can't proclaim ownership of the seized vessels due to its attempts to pretend that these ships aren't doing what they are obviously doing. Plus, as the European Policy Centre points out, Europe possesses all of the legal standing it needs to make these types of seizures a more regular occurrence. Between the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which allows nations to disrupt what they see as unsafe shipping in their waters, to the MARPOL and SOLAS laws that allow for ships to be detained if they don't meet appropriate safety standards, Russia won't have a legal leg to stand on, even if it tried to reclaim its seized ships. Just a quick side note, you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, now is the perfect time to do it. And once you have, come right back, because we're about to dig into something that we mentioned right at the beginning of the video. France's second shot hit Russia straight in the gut. While the capture of a shadow fleet ship is always big news, especially for Ukraine, as it engages in a war of attrition in which the path to victory seems to run through Ukraine's ability to outlast Russia financially and militarily, the second revelation is the big one. That revelation is that France has officially hurtled past the United States to become the largest provider of military intelligence to Ukraine. On January 16th, just under a week before the seizure of the Grinch, Business Insider reported that Emmanuel Macron has put Russia on notice by revealing that France now provides 2/3 of the intelligence that Ukraine uses in its war with Russia. We learned about this news during Macron's New Year's speech to the French military, where he said, "Where Ukraine was overwhelmingly dependent on American intelligence capacity a year ago, 2/3 is today provided by France. 2/3. That revelation is huge from the standpoint of helping Ukraine to decouple itself from the US, especially at a time when it's unclear just how much intelligence America is providing to Ukraine. Stick with us to the end because we'll be going deeper into that particular topic and why it's so important to Ukraine. As for France becoming the dominant intelligence partner, Business Insider says that all of this is in line with the country's push to become a regional military leader in Europe, as the Trump administration pushes the continent to take more responsibility for its own defense. In its report on Macron's comments, the Kyiv Independent explains why intelligence, no matter the source, is so vital to Ukraine. Every scrap of information that Ukraine can get its hands on is important. Of particular note are high-quality and recent satellite images, as this type of intelligence can alert Ukraine to everything from Russian troop positions to the location of key assets that it can strike with its long-range missiles and drones. Think of this sort of intelligence as the space-occupying supplement to the reconnaissance drones that constantly scan the ground from Ukraine's skies, and you get the idea. We don't know a huge amount about the types of intelligence that France is providing to Ukraine. However, we have plenty of hints, including a statement made by the French Minister of the Armed Forces, Sébastien Lecornu. Back in March 2025, Lecornu announced on France Interradio that his country was willing and able to share whatever intelligence Ukraine might need from it. In fact, it was already happening, assuming his statement claiming that our intelligence is sovereign, built on our own capabilities, we are sharing it with the Ukrainians, is anything to go by. Though Lecornu, much like Macron, didn't provide further details beyond that claim, his mention of a sovereign intelligence system has led Militani to conclude that France is likely providing intelligence to Ukraine via its Combassant Spéciale Optique, or CSO, military satellite constellation. The full deployment of the CSO was completed in 2025. Notably, the last of the 3 satellites in the constellation to get sent into space was transported to its launch site by a Ukrainian AN-124 aircraft, suggesting that a partnership was in the offing long before anybody revealed that it was in place. Militani explains what all 3 of these satellites offer in terms of their construction, stating, "All 3 satellites share an identical design. Their optical systems are based on the Korsh telescope configuration. The mirrors are made from the ultra-stable Zerodor glass ceramic, which has an almost zero thermal expansion coefficient. The CSO satellites also feature an infrared imaging channel. Each also has multiple telescopes that can be used to take photographs of the same target from several angles. For 3D terrain modeling, which is incredibly useful to Ukraine, this feature alone is more than enough reason for Ukraine to work alongside France." Another reason comes from the fact that it's not just the satellites themselves that are well made. The entire structure of the CSO is brilliant from an intelligence gathering perspective. Each of the 3 satellites has a defined purpose that allows the trio to work in tandem to provide extremely accurate data about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. CSO-1 is the joint highest flying of the satellites, as it operates at an altitude of 800 kilometers, or about 497 miles. This is the high-level overview intelligence gatherer that offers wide area reconnaissance via photos captured at a resolution of up to 35 centimeters, or about 13.7 inches per pixel. That's a high enough resolution to identify things like the positions of Russia's armored vehicles and aircraft. Next up is the logically named CSO-2, which flies at an altitude of 480 kilometers or about 298 miles. This satellite creates images with a resolution of 18 centimeters or about 7 inches per pixel. That higher resolution is the difference between identifying a tank on the ground and being able to tell the specific make and model of the tank being deployed. The satellite is even capable of identifying decoys, ensuring that Ukraine doesn't waste ammunition on fake weapons that present no real threat. The only downside is that CSO-2 operates in a layer of orbit where it's exposed to traces of Earth's atmosphere. Wear is and will continue to be a problem, so this satellite's lifespan is limited to about 10 years. It was launched in 2020. France will hopefully replace it in 2030. Finally, CSO-3 is almost identical to CSO-1 in terms of its orbit altitude and photo clarity. However, it serves a different role. CSO-3 increases something called the revisit rate. That term refers to the frequency at which an area can be imaged. It's a fairly simple concept. CSO-1 and CSO-3 both operate at the same altitude at different orbital phases. If CSO-1 provides a wide area view of a location before moving on, CSO-3 will pass by the same location hours later to refresh the image, so on, ensuring that the images Ukraine has are no more than 12 hours old, based on each satellite being on a standard 24-hour orbit cycle. And there's much more. Ukraine may also be benefiting from images captured by the 4 Pleiades and Pleiades Neo commercial satellites launched into orbit between 2011 and 2021 by Airbus Defence and Space. Again, Ukraine contributed to the deployment of this constellation, so it's not too much of a stretch to assume that it's also receiving images. After all, Pleiades Neo 3 and 4 were launched into space using Vega rockets that contained Ukrainian RD-843 engines built in Dnipro. Both of these satellites offer resolutions of 30 centimeters or 11.8 inches per pixel, allowing them to capture pictures of 14-kilometer or 8.69-mile swathes of territory. Add the Pleiades 1A and Pleiades 1B into the mix, which capture pictures of up to 20 kilometers or 12.4 miles of territory at resolutions of 50 centimeters or 19.6 inches per pixel, and you get a heady mix of commercially available satellite imagery. Plus, there's the Capacité de Renseignement Électromagnétique Spéciale, or CERES constellation consisting of 3 satellites. Again, Ukrainian rockets were used to help get these satellites into orbit, and all 3 operate at an altitude of about 700 kilometers, or approximately 434.9 miles. This trio of satellites is a little different from the ones we've already covered. They maintain orbit in a triangular formation, and they're used to locate and triangulate the sources of radio emissions on Earth. If Ukraine needs to know the source of a radio signal or discover if a relevant signal exists, these are the satellites for the job. Unfortunately, there are gaps in what these satellites can do for Ukraine. None appears capable of serving as an early warning system related to Russia's ballistic missile launches, for instance. That's a problem that all of Europe has. France also doesn't operate radar satellites, though it does receive imagery from Italy and Germany that it could conceivably send to Ukraine. Alternatively, the 2 countries in question could be sending the imagery directly. making them part of the third of Ukrainian intelligence that France doesn't cover. That is an awful lot of technical information we've just sent your way. So take a deep breath, because we're about to come back to why the intelligence France is providing to Ukraine is so important from the perspective of Ukraine's decoupling from the US. Ukraine can never be certain if the Trump administration is going to provide the intelligence that it needs. If the rollercoaster ride that the Ukraine went on with the US in 2025 has taught us anything, it's that the relationship between the two countries can change on a dime, often depending on how well peace talks with Russia are going. On March 5, 2025, US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz confirmed that America had paused the sharing of military intelligence with Ukraine in the wake of a disastrous White House meeting between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Though access was swiftly restored, the Kyiv Independent notes that Trump threatened to cut Ukraine off again if it didn't accept a terrible peace plan that would have seen it cede key territory to Russia. Even now, it's unclear just how much intelligence the US is sharing with Ukraine. It's clearly sharing some, but whether the Trump administration is providing information to Ukraine at the same level as the Joe Biden administration is a matter that's up for debate. For Ukraine, France may now seem like a more stable intelligence partner than the US has become over the past year. That alone is a major problem for Putin. He likely won't believe that he can manipulate Macron in the same ways that he tries to manipulate Trump. Of course, there are limitations to the intelligence that France can deliver, and Ukraine will absolutely want to keep the US as a vital intelligence partner if it can. But now that 2/3 of Ukraine's intelligence comes from France, the country will no longer be left blind if the US decides to once again cut support. Though we can never know for sure, Ukraine may have used French intelligence in a 48-hour series of airstrikes that ripped open the skies of occupied Ukraine and destroyed several Russian air defense systems and radar nodes. You can find out about that spectacular operation in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more in-depth coverage of the latest developments in Ukraine's intelligence situation. And thank you for watching.